asset manager known as AGI, a subsidiary of Allianz, the international financial services and insurance company. For years, these pension funds and others invested with AGI because they were promised a relatively safe investment with strict risk controls designed to weather a sudden storm, like a massive collapse in the stock market.
A ver si se oye.
But when the storm came in March of 2020, when the COVID crash, multi-year, multi-billion
Qué porquería de señales.
$1 scheme
Eso estamos viendo
committed
60
by a
personas.
group of senior AGI employees. Today is a day for accountability.
Hoy es el día
We are
de
here to
paga.
announce charges against the people at AGI who
Presenta
we allege
cargos
perpetrated this fraud
contra quienes hicieron
and then
fraude
tried to cover it up.
Intentaron cubrirlo
We're also
todavía.
announcing charges against AGI itself.
Anuncia cargos contra
Charges that
AGI.
AGI has agreed to plead guilty to in
Cargos
one of the
contra los
most
que AGI se
significant
declaró
corporate
culpable. Eso no es
prosecutions
común,
in history.
Uf, AGI se
First,
declaró.
we are unsealing an indictment charging
No es común eso.
one of AGI's executives,
Maldito sonido.
a man named Greg Tornot. Tornot is charged with conspiracy, security fraud, and investment advisory fraud for his role in devising and perpetrating a scheme to portfolio managers who were
Qué porquería de señal.
Taylor and Von Nelson have each admitted their role in this scheme, have pled guilty, and they are now cooperating with the government. We allege that one of the ways that Tornot and his co-conspirators at AGI carried out this fraud was by marketing the fact that Tornot told investors that he had a so-called master cop monitoring everything he did with investors' money. But that cop was asleep on the beat. And that is one reason why we have also charged AGI itself. AGI again has agreed to plead guilty, to pay more than $3 billion in restitution.
3 billones de dólares. Wow.
To pay a criminal fine of approximately $2.3 billion.
En restitución nada más.
And to forfeit approximately $463 million to the government. Let me say a little bit more about the allegations. Between 2014 and 2020, Greg Tornot was the chief investment officer of a set of investment products at AGI known as the Structured Alpha Funds. These funds were marketed largely to institutional investors, including pension funds for workers all across America. We allege that Tornot misled these investors into believing that the funds were protected from a sudden drop in the stock market. He told them that he would purchase particular tail risk hedges. That's a particular type of financial insurance that would provide the protection.
Dijo que les iba a dar protección contra las caídas del mercado,
And began cutting into Tornot's and AGI's profits.
lo cual era mentira.
We allege faced a choice. He could have continued to provide investors with the protection they were promised, even if it meant less money for him and AGI, or he could lie and secretly buy cheaper hedges that provided much less protection to investors.
Cuando empezó toda la crisis y todo se empezó a caer, dice que esta persona, el encargado, pudo haber escogido seguir protegiendo a sus clientes con el hedge que estaba manejando o elegir una opción más barata que no los protegería completamente y eligió no protegerlos. Se descubrieron documentos que estaban exponiendo a sus clientes a un riesgo significativo.
one of the fundamental duties of an investment advisor. That is the duty to tell the truth. And for years,
Estas
it
personas
worked.
violaron
No one knew.
la obligación básica de un
Because investors
inversor,
were in the
de un
dark, they
asesor
continued to
financiero, que
trust
es
AGI
decir la
and
verdad.
Tornado
No
with
es
their
todo. O sea,
money.
a veces el mercado no es bonito,
But
pues
then
tienes que
COVID hit.
decirlo.
The markets crashed, and more than
El
100,000
mercado
individual investors lost
crashó
billions of dollars, just like
y
that.
más de 1000 participantes perdieron miles
And the
de
master
millones
cop
de dólares.
that Tornado said was looking over his shoulder, it wasn't. Year after year, AGI failed to provide meaningful
AGI
oversight
falló
for
para
Tornado
dar
or the
tipo de
structured alpha
seguridad
funds.
o
And so, year
una
after
asesoría
year, Tornado
correcta a
was
sus
able to
clientes.
deceive investors about the risks he was taking with their money. Let me be very clear. Much of this historic fraud was made possible because AGI's control environment was riddled with holes. It was completely inadequate to police this part of the business. It was not designed to verify that Tornado and his colleagues were telling investors the truth. And it was powerless to catch the fake documents and other lies that we allege were being fed to investors to hide the fraud. Now, I want to speak in a little more detail about the charges against AGI. We recognize that charges against corporations have been rare, and that deferred prosecution agreements or non-prosecution agreements or declinations have been much more common. We leveled criminal charges against AGI based solely on the facts of this case and because it was the right thing to do. The scheme alleged was an egregious, long-running, and extensive fraud that went undetected for years. It occurred at a very profitable component of AGI, one that accounted for approximately 25% of AGI's revenue in recent years, which amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. The primary architect of the fraud, Greg Tornado, was one of AGI's highest paid employees. AGI, meanwhile, is a registered investment advisor and had fiduciary duties of care and loyalty to its clients. And what happened here, the lies, the deceit, the weak oversight, is contrary to what an investment advisor should be doing to protect investors. No compliance system is perfect, but the controls at AGI didn't even stand a chance to prevent or detect this type of fraud. And of course, AGI did not self-report this fraud. They didn't even discover it. The outstanding attorneys at the SEC figured it out first. Now, once the fraud was discovered, AGI and its parent company, Allianz, fully cooperated with our investigation, and I want to specifically commend Allianz and the leaders of Allianz for their willingness to do the right thing and compensate the innocent victims of this fraudulent scheme. That cooperation and the willingness to compensate victims are factors that led to a significant reduction in the fine that AGI will be required to pay. It's also a substantial reason why this office will not charge Allianz and will not seek a deferred prosecution agreement or any other type of resolution with Allianz. But once again, I want to be very clear. Cooperation, even outstanding cooperation, is not the same thing as self-reporting. And cooperation after a fraud has already been caught by the government is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Cooperation is simply one of many factors we must consider when determining whether corporate charges are appropriate. Now, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. The Southern District of New York is going to be relentless in rooting out corruption in our financial markets. If you are someone who has ripped off investors in the past, is ripping off investors right now, or is even thinking of ripping off investors in the future, stop, because we are not asleep.
Estás pensando en defraudar a los clientes en el futuro para antes de que te agarremos. Porque cooperar, cuando ya te cachamos, dice, no, no es cooperar, no es un pase fuera de la cárcel, es simplemente ya te agarramos. Debes de evitar hacer el fraude. Asegúrate de marcarnos a nosotros antes de que nosotros te marquemos a ti. Muy, muy bien.
And I'm joined again today with Daniel Brubaker, the inspector in charge of the New York Division of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and I want to thank him and his team for their incredible work in this case. I also want to thank the special agents in my office who also did outstanding work alongside of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. And I'm also joined by Gabir Graywall, the enforcement director at the SEC. And I want to thank him and his team for their extraordinary work in this matter. I've been working shoulder to shoulder with the SEC for a very long time, and I can say that this was the SEC at its very best. And lastly, I want to thank the career prosecutors in my office who were handling this case. Margaret Ram, Gina Castellano, Nicholas Foley, and Richard Cooper, and their supervisors, Andrea Griswold and Scott Hartman, the chiefs of the office's Securities and Commodities Fraud Task Force. I'd now like to invite up Inspector in Charge Brubaker to the podium.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. In all my years as a United States Postal Inspector, it never ceases to amaze me
Porque dice una cita de él.
the money is involved. This case is yet another example. Allianz Global Investors is an international management firm. These individuals took advantage of its global name recognition to devise a scheme which misled investors, leading to the loss of billions of dollars. Unfortunately, this has become a common theme we see each time we investigate these types of cases. Naturally, institutional investors relied on the data and facts submitted to them by fund managers. Investors were duped into thinking the risks were controlled and the employee investments were safe. The pandemic actually exposed the lies by Allianz's structured alpha fund managers. And when the market fell due to COVID, the funds collapsed. We can't forget the real people were impacted here. Innocent people who invested in pension funds for their employees. For postal inspectors, it's always our mission and honor to investigate these cases with our DOJ partners. Together, we right the wrongs of individuals and corporations to ensure our customers and the investing public can benefit from fair and truthful investing platforms. While we are tirelessly investigating these crimes, investors, whether public or private, need to remember these facts. First, ask questions and investigate all investments that sound too good to be true.
Inversionistas tienes que hacer preguntas. Número uno, pregunta, investiga, o sea, el due diligence, como decimos. Dos, no confíes en el buen nombre de la compañía inversionista. Revisa, no importa el fondo. Revisa la documentación que tengan sobre lo que están haciendo con tu dinero. Recuerda que con grandes recompensas hay gran riesgo. Como la de Spider-Man, pero diferente. Sí. Si crees que algo falta, repórtalo.
Postal inspectors want investors to know that there are no guarantees when investing. There's always some degree of risk. However, investors should feel comfortable with the knowledge that law enforcement will spare no resource to keep markets fair and equitable for all. We work day and night to reveal those individuals and change the economic balance by breaking the law. I'd like to personally thank my inspectors, Team Leader Brandy Kane Gonzalez and Inspectors
sus agradecimientos,
Walunas and Christopher
como si fuera el Oscar.
for their tireless dedication to this case. In closing, today's action against these individuals should be a loud warning to those whose ambitions are so large that they cannot control their own actions.
Las acusaciones el día de hoy de estas Allianz tienen que ser una advertencia para Citadel y los demás. Bueno, yo creo que Citadel, pero para las otras personas que hacen tácticas corruptas o desleales o incorrectas, pues en general, para que dejen de hacerlo.
Thank you, Damien, and good morning, everyone. Today, in parallel civil proceedings, the SEC charged Allianz Global Investors US, or AGI US, and 3 of its former employees for their roles in a multi-billion-dollar scheme to defraud institutional investors.
El cargo es directamente contra AGI, Allianz, y 3 empleados.
Managing the retirement savings of everyday Americans. In fact, pension funds made up the majority of the investor victims in this case. When the defendant's fraudulent scheme collapsed in 2020, these investors collectively lost more than $5 billion. And the retirement
Perdieron
savings of
esos
teachers,
inversionistas $5,000
bus
millones
drivers,
de
engineers, and
dólares.
other American workers across the country
Trabajadores
were
regulares
put
de
at
pie.
risk.
Todo no se
Meanwhile, the
puso en
defendants
riesgo.
profited from their deception, reaping millions of dollars in bonuses year after year. But thanks to the efforts of our enforcement division and our law enforcement partners, not only are those responsible for this fraud being held accountable today, but importantly, the victims in this case have been or soon will be made whole. In one word, the defendant's conduct in this case was brazen. From at least 2016 through March of 2020, they lied to investors about nearly every aspect of the structured alpha investment funds, the highly complex products that they were aggressively marketing.
El fondo de inversiones Alfa fue
Using fabricated
que
risk
hizo el
reports,
fraude, pues.
altered performance data, and manipulated spreadsheets. We allege that the defendants, in most cases at Gregory Ternant's direction, lied about their investment strategy. They lied about the fund's performance.
Mintieron sobre su estrategia de inversión, sobre sus retornos, sobre el riesgo y sobre los pasos que tomaron para mitigar el riesgo. Lo que siempre se ha dicho, amigos, mitigar el riesgo es importantísimo. Y eso lo repitieron año tras año. Y esto permitió mantener el riesgo oculto de sus inversionistas hasta que en el marzo del 2020 pues, hubo un evento que disparó los supuestos eventos que iban a activar esa mitigación del riesgo que habían prometido los fondos de Allianz, pero pues no, como no tenían los fondos de manejo del riesgo, lo que pasó fue que el fondo se fue al piso, se cayó, porque no compraron los seguros, no tenían el hedging apropiado, vaya. Inventaron historias para justificarse este error.
As alleged in our complaint, after Bond Nelson lied on the record, SEC enforcement staff confronted him on his lies. Realizing that the gig was up, Bond Nelson took a restroom break during his testimony, and he never came back.
Me empezaron a interrogar. Luego echó una mentira. Ellos ya sabían, lo cacharon. Y ya que lo cacharon, dijo, ¿sabes qué? Tengo que ir al baño. Se fue al baño y ya no regresó. Parece chiste, pero así pasó. Tengo que ir al baño ahorita. Voy por unos cigarros. Se fue de la sala de interrogación y ya no regresó. No mames, parece chiste esta madre.
AGI US has entered into a settlement agreement with the SEC. In that agreement, AGI US admits to violations of the federal securities laws and has agreed to pay billions of dollars as part of an integrated global resolution, including more than $1 billion to settle SEC charges. First, AGI US has agreed to disgorgement and prejudgment interest of approximately $350 million in our case, which the Commission has deemed satisfied by the forfeiture and restitution order that will be entered in the criminal case. In addition, AGI will pay a $675 million civil penalty to the SEC. This is one of the largest penalties in an SEC fraud case since the days of Enron and WorldCom. Additionally, AGI US has made approximately 114 institutional investors whole at a cost of more than $5 billion. And it'll soon wind down its U.S. operations. I too want to take a moment to recognize the SEC staff. While all of us get to stand up here and take the credit for this announcement, the real work is done by the public servants who line these walls right here. Public servants like John Shapiro and James Murtha, who under the leadership of Assistant Director Reed Moyo, worked diligently to review thousands of pages of documents, including complex options trading data and risk reports, and put the pieces of this scheme together. They set in motion a series of events that not only brought us to today's announcements, but also, again, importantly, led to the recovery of billions for harmed investors.
Voy al baño, ahorita vengo. Ay, no puedes inventar estas madres, neta que. En la película va a ser muy chistoso.
And one that exemplifies our long-standing and productive working relationships with the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. This announcement and these partnerships should serve as a strong warning to wrongdoers that all of us are committed to not only rooting out and deterring misconduct in our markets, but also working together to restore investor trust and confidence in them. Again, I want to thank the U.S. Attorney and the Postal Inspector for their incredible partnership, and I want to also commend the incredible work of the line prosecutors here in the Southern District, the agents at the Southern District, and the inspectors from the Inspection Service that worked on this case. Thank you.
Ya acabó.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Preguntas. No sé qué preguntas, te escucho.
Well, the decision to file charges in this case and the way in which the charges resolved here with the
La decisión para presentar cargos
plea,
y seguir este caso
was made here. This
fue
decision
hecha
was
aquí.
mine,
Fue
of course, we
tuya de este güey,
consult,
perdón.
everyone we need to consult with
Y se
before
consultó
making a decision
con la
like
persona
this,
apropiada antes de
and that
decidir.
process was followed. But we looked at the facts of this case.
Vimos los hechos del caso, vimos todas las circunstancias, todos los factores,
To look at, and this was the judgment that we reached.
y esto fue lo que declaramos, que si era, se declararon culpables y fue lo que hicieron. Vieron el caso culpable. No sé qué diga, está muy bajito.
Unfortunately, I can't get into that. It's outside the four corners of the indictment, but you are correct that the indictment notes that Tornat was one of the highest paid employees at AGI for years.
Dice que es una pregunta, no sé qué le preguntaron, pero dice que no puede entrar en tipo de detalles porque están clasificados todavía, porque están fuera, están parte del caso, vaya.
Well, look, taking the second question first, I think there are a number of civil suits that have been filed against.
Y si tomar la segunda pregunta, se han presentado varios casos civiles. No es el departamento de este güey.
Some of the institutional investors face, the losses that they face, and we've obviously talked about some of those losses in our charging documents, and you can take a look at the SEC's complaint as well for that information. And so I think our focus has been on the nearly more than 100,000
ha sido en los 100,000 individuos que invirtieron a través de estos fondos y sus pensiones, su dinero, pues, su fondo de retiro, vaya, que se invirtió en AGI y es Allianz, pues. Sobre tu primera pregunta sobre los diferentes castigos que pongo a contactarte para darte más detalles porque es muy complicado para verlo aquí, pues, nomás, y si no inventas. No sé qué pregunta. Está muy bajito.
So let me take the second question first. Both of those individuals have pled guilty to cooperation agreements, and as you likely know, the decision whether to file a 5K letter is one that follows after a period of cooperation is complete. And so we're at the very beginning of that process right now, so I can't comment on what may come. But it's our hope and expectation that that cooperation.
Responde una pregunta sobre
As
la
for the first
cooperación.
question, the cooperation between
Y la primera
regulators
pregunta,
here and regulators abroad, I can't